President Trump is hailing his three-hour summit with Vladimir Putin as successful and productive, despite no official peace deal coming out of the meeting. Putin saying there's potential for joint work on trade and business, including technical advances in space exploration. The president maintaining he cares about peace first and foremost. Putin reportedly proposing to freeze the front line if Ukraine hands over control of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which Russia has wanted since 2014. Some analysts warn that would give Russia a huge economic and military advantage and make security guarantees from Europe and the U.S. even more important. Now, President Trump posted this on Truth Social. President Zelenskyy of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue to fight. Secretary of State Marco Rubio denying a claim from a European official that President Trump favors Putin's proposal. He said this to Maria on Sunday Morning Futures. Joining me now, Heritage Foundation, Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom Director Nile Gardiner. Now, you were in Alaska for that summit. Let's go back to Friday. What did you learn? In particular, what did you observe on the Russian side and how they approached the summit? And what do you think that their strategy was going in?
Well, thanks very much for having me on the show today. And I was in Anchorage on Friday, and I think what was most striking really about this summit is that President Trump really is the undisputed leader of the free world. He's the only man in the world who can force the Russians to the negotiating table, and the fact that Putin came to negotiate is a reflection of strong U.S. Robust leadership on the world stage. There's no doubt about it. And I do think that President Trump is determined to bring an end to the war. I think the Russians understand that very clearly. They're not dealing here with weak-kneed Joe Biden or Barack Obama. They're dealing with President Trump, who's a much tougher adversary, of course, for the Russians. So I think we saw a strong projection of U.S. strength on the world stage and a determination, really, to force the Russians to negotiate, to bring an end to the war. After all, of course, Russia is the aggressor here. They invaded Ukraine. And Putin has to be forced really to back down and end this war. And I was struck by the fact that Putin actually was quite deferential towards President Trump during this meeting, and also very strikingly, as Putin landed on the ground, a U.S. B-52 bomber flew overhead in a clear message to the Russians about where global power lies today. The United States is the world's dominant superpower, and I think that's something that even Vladimir Putin accepts today.
Interesting that you say that, and you're right about that bomber. That was an interesting moment in all of this, and we're showing our viewers the map and the land. And here's the question as we move into today about what Zelenskyy is going to be willing to agree to. So he's going to meet with the president and European leaders today at the White House. Everything gets underway at noon Eastern time to talk about Putin's proposal for peace. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and Finland's president all are going to be there at the White House today. Zelenskyy saying he would not give up land that Russia doesn't already occupy. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult, of course, for the Ukrainians to accept giving up territory that they fought very hard for. The Russians are demanding, of course, Donbass province, which contains 6.5 million people. It's the industrial heartland of Ukraine. And Zelenskyy has ruled out handing over that territory, although the Russians control much of it today. But the Ukrainians, I think, are going to resist handing over that territory. I think it's important, of course, for the Russians to be forced to make concessions themselves. If the Ukrainians are going to have to give up some kind of territory to end the war, the Russians have to make concessions. There's also the issue of about 35,000 Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped by the Russian regime and being held by the Russians. And this is an issue actually that Melania Trump actually sort of indirectly raised in a letter to Putin. And I think there are many concessions the Russians should be forced to make if there's going to be some kind of territorial agreement. So we'll have to see what Zelenskyy says today. And it's very important for the United States to maintain, of course, the threat of very severe economic sanctions against Russia on the table. The Russians have to be forced to negotiate and to make concessions. The United States has the power, of course, to cripple the Russian economy. And I do think the threat of sanctions has to be maintained by the United States. At the same time, the European Union needs to stop buying Russian energy and oil. Last year alone, the EU purchased $8.5 billion worth of Russian LNG. This actually helps to fund the Russian war machine. So there's a huge amount of hypocrisy coming from some European countries, especially the Germans, the French, for example, the Spanish. They need to stop actually funding Putin's war machine and end their dependence upon Russian energy. That should be a key point raised today by the White House with regard to the European approach here. There's too much hypocrisy on the part of European leaders right now.
Yeah, that's something that Senator Roger Marshall brought up with us earlier in the hour, the fact that the Europeans are purchasing that Russian oil. And also, let's not forget that China and India are funding Putin's war machine by buying oil and natural gas and other minerals from the Russians, and North Korea sending troops. I mean, it's all about axis of evil, if you will, which obviously the administration wants to break apart. I want to move over to another issue happening overseas. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered for protests across Israel over the weekend. Tens of thousands were in Tel Aviv alone, all calling for an end to the war and the return of the hostages. Dozens of protesters reportedly have been arrested. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu criticized the protesters. He says that this just hardens Hamas's stance as the IDF is pushing forward with plans to occupy Gaza City. Your reaction to the events in Israel over the weekend?
Yes, well, my view is the United States must stand firmly with Benjamin Netanyahu. He has been a very successful leader of Israel. He has waged a highly successful campaign against Hamas, but also against Iran, the puppet masters of Hamas. And I think the U.S. should 100% support the Israeli government at this time. We need to see the complete defeat and destruction of Hamas, a monstrously evil and barbaric terrorist movement. Mr. Netanyahu is 100% committed to doing that. The Israeli approach is working. Hamas is being destroyed. We will only see the release of all the hostages once Hamas is defeated and destroyed. That's the approach that Netanyahu is taking. It's the right one. And the United States and the free world must stand with Israel right now.
Nile Gardiner, a lot to digest this morning with you. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
All right.